Good morning and welcome to Rising. We've got a terrific show this week. Lots of analysis of the top political news story, the only political news story right now. Good to see you again, Jessica Burbank. Thanks so much for joining us remotely.
It is good to be with you, Robbie, from our Iowa HQ. From
the Iowa headquarters. Did you have a happy 4th? It was nice to have so many consecutive days off, I thought, given how the 4th fell. It was nice to take a load off.
That's nice, Robbie. I was here Friday. I was doing Rising. It was awesome. I had a relaxing weekend aside from every so often scrolling on Twitter and seeing the latest defected members of the Joe Biden camp in the Democratic Party.
Yes, indeed. It was not a great holiday for the president. Let's get to that news. President Joe Biden's abysmal news cycle is continuing as Congress returns to D.C. Now, this will be a pivotal week for Biden as his team fends off a growing number of Democratic defectors, as you just mentioned. During a private call convened by House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries on Sunday, several senior House Democrats said they hoped Biden would drop out, including Representative Jerry Nadler, Adam Smith, Mark Takano, and Joe Morrell. Several others expressed skepticism of his chances to win, including Representative Jim Himes, Don Bear, and Jamie Raskin. Now, it does not end there. Take a listen to what Democratic Representative Adam Schiff had to say on NBC.
But the performance on the debate stage, I think, rightfully raised questions among the American people about whether the president has the vigor to defeat Donald Trump. And this is an existential race. Given Joe Biden's incredible record, given Donald Trump's terrible record, he should be mopping the floor with Donald Trump. Joe Biden is running against a criminal. It should not be even close, and there's only one reason it is close, and that's the president's age. And what I would say, Kristen, what I would advise the president is seek out the opinions of people you trust. He's obviously talked to his family about this, and that's important. But he should seek out people with some distance and objectivity. He should seek out pollsters who are not his own pollsters. He should take a moment to make the best informed judgment. And if the judgment is run, then run hard and beat that SOB.
And here's Democratic Senator Chris Murphy on CNN.
Voters do have questions. And personally, I love Joe Biden. I don't know that the interview on Friday night did enough to answer those questions. And so I think this week is going to be absolutely critical. I think the president needs to do more. I'm not advising this campaign, but if I were, I would probably suggest that the president get out there and do a town hall, that he do a press conference, that he show the country that he is still the old Joe Biden.
Not all Democrats have gone that far, however. Let's take a listen to Senator Bernie Sanders.
Politically, can he count on you to be on the campaign trail for him this summer and fall? Can he count on your support?
I've already done 6 events in Wisconsin. We've been to New York. I've been to Ohio. And let me say this, and maybe the most important point, Bob, I want to make this morning. What we are talking about now is not a Grammy Award contest for Best Singer. Biden is old. He's not as articulate as he once was. I wish he could jump up the steps on Air Force One. He can't. What we have got to focus on is policy. Whose policies have and will benefit the vast majority of the people in this country.
Most Democrats have stayed silent, but House and Senate members returned to Capitol Hill today for the first time since the debate, so that could change. Meanwhile, the Biden campaign is doing damage control. In a letter to congressional Democrats that was shared by the campaign, Biden wrote, quote, "I am firmly committed to staying in this race, to running this race to the end, and to beating Donald Trump. The question of how to move forward has been well aired for over a week now, and it's time for it to end. And any weakening of resolve or lack of clarity about the task ahead only helps Trump and hurts us. It is time to come together." President Biden also joined Morning Joe today to again assure voters.
The bottom line here is that we're not going anywhere. I am not going anywhere. I wouldn't be running if I didn't absolutely believe that I am the best candidate to beat Donald Trump in 2024. We had a Democratic nominating process where the voters spoke clearly. I won 14 million of those votes, et cetera. So I just want, I'm not only believed that from the beginning, but I wanted to reassert it and demonstrate that it's true. And I'm going to be doing that all through this week and from here on.
You know, there was a quote on Twitter going around that Democratic strategists around Joe Biden threw out the idea of comparing him to Yoda, that yes, he is old, but he is very wise and should be respected, and that Trump is more like Jabba the Hutt. But I think the more proper sci-fi fantasy reference here is it's giving Schmeagol, to be honest, Robbie. The way he's clinging on to his run and the White House is concerning.
My precious, my precious. Yeah, and Yoda loses in the prequel movies, which I know you just recently went through, Jessica, and are near and dear to my heart at all times. I'm a defender of them. Yoda loses his battle with Palpatine and has to go into exile. But Joe Biden is giving no indications that he intends to step down whatsoever. In fact, he's saying the opposite loudly over and over and over again. Despite these mounting concerns, criticism, the dam has broken. You know, so many prominent Democrats now have come out and expressed either concern, heavy concern and skepticism, or have outright said there should be a different candidate at this point, that they don't expect Joe Biden to defeat Donald Trump, and so he should give someone else a chance at it. But my question is, does all this activity on Capitol Hill, and this is going to be a very important week because, as we said, Congress is back. They're now having meetings. They're going to discuss with each other, you know, feel each other out. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? Are you worried, you know, you swing state member in a district that's evenly divided, how do you feel about your reelection given Joe Biden's position at the top of the ticket? Those conversations are going to be happening this week. And the tide is definitely turning against Biden. We can't deny any of that. But my point is, none of that matters if Biden is committed to staying on the ticket because he wants it at all costs. No, there's no they. They can't make him. He has to agree to step aside. And I don't know if these people have enough access to him. You know, I was watching, I was flipping back and forth yesterday between CNN, MSNBC, Fox, etc. And I heard some guests on either CNN or MSNBC was saying, you know, if only Chuck Schumer, if only Hakeem Jeffries could, you know, get in the room with, you know, Biden one-on-one and talk him out of this. But we're hearing that the family is the ones you need to get through to get access to Biden. We're seeing that reported. And the family is dead set on him running again, and so is he. So there's it's a significant hurdle for the Democratic Party to overcome if they do decide, if you know, the members kind of collectively decide that he's just too toxic to win re-election.
And then we have folks who are still defending him, who are top Democratic strategists, commentators, and it's really ridiculous to hear them say, like, oh, we absolutely have to stick with Joe Biden. I would vote for him if he was in a coma. I mean, really ridiculous stuff. And to say that you want him to be in public office when all of the leaders of the party are questioning it, they're worried about their chances of re-election and holding their seats down ballot, because this does make Democrats look weak. In a moment when they're only talking about how democracy is at stake, what does it mean to have a guy remain in the highest public office because his family thinks it's a good idea more so than the leaders of the political party? Not to mention that there wasn't a real primary for Joe Biden this time around. And also in 2020, when I was working on the Bernie Sanders campaign, it was very obvious that he wasn't a candidate that people really wanted as president. It was simply because the party made him an alternative to Bernie Sanders. And there was this fear that a progressive, radical ticket with Bernie Sanders wouldn't fare well with Donald Trump. And so a few phone calls from Obama, a few campaign promises for cabinet positions led to a lot of top candidates dropping out and endorsing Biden, who was just promising to be a darling of the Democratic establishment. And that's really what got us here, is a lot of very undemocratic decisions from within the party. And now we're at this point where it could cost them the majority in the House and the Senate if they run a candidate like Biden. That just makes the party look weak because he's old, but also very undemocratic when that's like their one major thing.
No, you're absolutely correct. This is something we've brought up a lot of times. Yeah, the fact that he won these primaries in this cycle. I mean, yes, he did. That's true. But they did not they were not competitive elections. They did not hold debates, for instance, even though there was Dean Phillips and RFK Jr. and Marianne Williamson at various points. On the Republican side, they tried. They had debates. Now, Trump didn't attend them. They had a competitive primary process. Conservative media tried to put forth an alternative candidate. They really rallied behind DeSantis at various stages. There was a real effort to have the candidate be someone other than Trump, or to have at least there be a process for the people deciding to have someone other than Trump. It did not work because too many Republican primary voters want Trump still well beyond any of the other candidates. And so they got Trump. But that wasn't, I don't think on the Democratic side that sentiment was able to be expressed, even though a majority of Democrats said they worried Biden was too old to do the job for 4 more years. They had no way to put that concern into action because the process was not made competitive for them. So yes, he won the process technically, but I think that's very different from saying that he was the clear runaway choice in a healthy democratic process, because then you could make that argument at this point. And also, a lot has changed for him even in the last 6 months. I think there are serious questions about whether the cognitive decline, the age-related decline that was so evident at the debates has perhaps accelerated, as often happens with old people. We've all gone through this with family members and friends, et cetera. If that has occurred even in a very short and recent window, meaning that action needs to be taken. But again, action can't be taken unless he sees the light.
Absolutely. And then you look at Donald Trump when he was running again, because he got so many votes in that primary, and they did have a real primary process that was competitive and happened across enough states that people felt like their voices were heard. It also meant that a lot of Republicans in government were a little bit afraid to question Donald Trump. The reason so many establishment Democrats, Chris Murphy's regarded as a progressive, people like Jim Himes are not very well known, but a lot of the people that are defecting are members of the very centrist part of the Democratic Party. Jim Himes is one of the chairs of the New Democratic Coalition. This is a group of Democrats that basically says, we love free market capitalism and we're going to protect corporations and the free market. These are not like the radical leftists of the Democratic Party. And the reason they feel comfortable deflecting is because Biden doesn't have the popular support that a candidate who won a competitive primary would have. He also doesn't have the wherewithal to even run a competitive campaign in the general election. That's something that a primary campaign would have fleshed out. If he was debating other members of his own party for this spot, for the nomination, he would have been vetted far before we got to the point of the first debates for the 2024 general election. So it's a lot of huge mistakes from leaders in the party. And while they can't push him out, I think because we're seeing so many top donors, so many centrist Democrats pushing for this, I think we will see a consensus emerge when everyone's at Capitol Hill talking to each other about what this means for their reelections, what this means for what's going on back home in their state and the future of the Democratic Party. I think that's going to motivate a much stronger coalition of people to say, we've got to come up with a plan to get this guy out. Because right now, I think the Biden campaign has made a list of who's defected, and they've decided it's not enough people. But I only see that list growing to a point where you can't ignore it.
Well, we're going to keep talking about this all day on Rising. We're going to explore other facets of these developments, take a closer look at his poll numbers, and more. Stick around, more Rising right after this. President Biden's poll numbers continue to sink. According to The Hill and Decision Desk HQ, Donald Trump is trouncing Biden 59.3% to 40.8%. The most recent New York Times Siena College poll found that Trump was leading Biden by 6 percentage points, 49% to 43%. Biden's dwindling poll numbers beg the question, do people even like Joe Biden? According to a 538 tracker, we don't quite know how well-liked or unliked he is, but we do know he's deeply unpopular. A majority of voters polled, 57.2% to be exact, they disapprove of the president, while 37.1% approve.
Deep reservations about Biden are trickling in from all corners. A group of business executives penned a letter to Biden, urging him to pass the torch, writing, quote, "We believe that nothing short of American democracy is at stake this November, and we are at risk of a devastating loss," the letter reads. Filmmaker Rob Reiner did not mince words, posting, quote, "It's time to stop effing around. If the convicted felon wins, we lose our democracy. Joe Biden has effectively served the U.S. with honor, decency, and dignity. It's time for Joe Biden to step down." Literary legend Stephen King posted, quote, "Joe Biden has been a fine president, but it's time for him, in the interests of the America he so clearly loves, to announce he will not run for re-election." And so while a lot of people have talked about this based on vibes, based on the debate performance, the data really doesn't lie. And as much as we can talk about how old Joe is and how hard that was to watch, the reality is he's not looking like the candidate that can win in November. And the fact that Democrats are dealing with that data and slowly saying it's time for you to step down, Joe, but Joe won't look at that data, it seems like he's surrounded by a bunch of yes men that want to ignore the numbers, which don't lie, Robbie.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The numbers look horrible for Joe Biden. As far as we can tell, he just doesn't believe them. That's what we hear from political reporters who speak to members of his inner circle. His view is that everybody's been wrong about him time and time again, that he's been counted out before, and he always, proves everybody wrong. And he can point to the 2022 midterms when it was expected that Republicans were going to have a red wave and Democrats had a better than expected result. He can point to his win in 2020. However, I was seeing a CNN clip with their pollster going into it, tackling the notion that the polls have underestimated Joe Biden in the past. If you actually look at the 2020 general election polling, the polls, if anything, overstated Biden's chances. You have to remember that in 2020, Donald Trump was the incumbent. Trump was down against Biden basically the entire time. Sometimes he was behind Joe Biden as much as 8 points. In the end, he ended up losing to Biden by about 4 points. In many of the polls throughout the race actually had Biden beating Trump by even more. So the fact that right now Trump is massively up against Biden, if we're talking about the polls, whether they're getting things right, it is perfectly plausible. In fact, it might be the more plausible thing to expect that the polls are overestimating Joe Biden's chances right now. Right now, these poll results might be looking more favorable for Joe Biden than would be the results on Election Day. And that's especially true if the concerns about age are only going to get more palpable as we see more of Joe Biden, his performance in the upcoming debate. He's supposed to be on the campaign trail. We also should keep in mind right now in the swing states, very little advertising money is being spent by Trump, by Republicans, to talk about Joe Biden. They have yet to really get out their persuasion campaign on the airways. That has not landed yet. And if that's going to have, you'd have to be naive to think that will have no effect. That is at least going to have a mildly in Trump's favor effect. Whereas on the other side, it's just not true. There's been nothing but criticism of Trump emanating from all corners of the Democratic media, it's never stopped. It's never ended. It's never gone away for 1 second in the last 8 years.
To say he's been written off throughout his life. You were a U.S. Senator for decades. You were on the Democratic presidential debate stage for the primaries a handful of times. You were the vice president. No one's written Joe Biden off. And his response about this, it's like very bad for our prospects of his real cognitive state. Because does that mean he forgot his decades in the Senate and his time as vice president? Very concerning stuff coming from Joe Biden. And also, the response to double down and say, I am the president of the United States. He tweeted this from the official account. Let me be clear that I am the president of the United States right now, and I will run until the end. It's begging for respect. I think anyone who has to remind people they're the president is in an abysmal state in their presidential campaign as an incumbent. And to tweet something like that, it's like him saying, I'm the president. Jamie Harrison says it's my turn with the White House, you guys. Stop trying to take it away. And to address the claims about cognitive decline by saying, well, I've just got to go to bed sooner at 8 p.m. That doesn't make us feel better. What about all of the other countries that are a national security threat? Now they know the commander-in-chief is in bed after 8 p.m. Eastern time. That doesn't make us feel better. And so his response has definitely made his situation worse than if he just said, I had a bad debate, I understand your concerns, and we're looking at all of our options, and we're ensuring that we run the strongest campaign possible. That's it. You don't address it any further. But I think it's at the point where he can't ignore it. And so we're getting the real Joe Biden's response, and it's concerning that his ego is leading the way in the White House.
We were making Star Wars parallels earlier in the show. I saw this parallel is not unique to me. I saw this from I think it's Socialist Sopranos memes or something on Twitter. It's a great account. There's parallels to Junior Soprano, the aging mob boss on The Sopranos, which is one of my favorite television shows of all time. As an Italian Catholic American, it resonates with me. And Tony Soprano says, you know, if you have to keep saying you're the boss over and over again, you're not really the boss. And actually, Junior Soprano in that show is the old man who's in charge, who's ostensibly in charge, but Tony's running everything behind the scenes, does suffer cognitive decline over the course of the show and ends up very confused and disoriented and still nominally in charge, but actually has no idea what's going on and even forgets that he's involved in the mob. Sorry, spoilers for if anyone is still waiting to watch this 20-year-old show. If you haven't seen it, it's great. You should watch it. But anyway, yeah, you're exactly right that, just insisting, I'm the guy in charge, I'm the guy in charge. You have to demonstrate that you're in charge by either delivering substantively on the policies you promised. And there was already, before the age stuff, there was already tremendous frustration from the people he needs to show up to vote for him, from Democrats, from the left, as you talk about with his Middle East policy and with his failed promises on student loans and other issues, policies I don't agree with and wouldn't want him to deliver on, which I'm not a supporter of them or a supporter of his, but things he certainly promised to his base to get them energized, to persuade them that he should be the guy at the top of the ticket, and he's not delivered on that at all. But if it's not him, it's going to be Kamala Harris in all likelihood. I think the idea of it being anyone other than Biden or Kamala is becoming more and more of a fantasy. CNN did run some of that polling on Gavin Newsom, Gretchen Whitmer, et cetera, and they're just not that politically well known at this point, especially Gretchen Whitmer. The idea that those people, they might very well do better than Biden, but it seems unlikely for Harris to be passed over. She did have a favorable showing in that poll, the CNN poll from last week, showing her faring better against Trump, still losing, but doing better against Trump than Joe Biden. So that's the case right there, but it's a case that has to persuade Joe Biden, and I just don't see that happening.
Right, and you and I were joking around with Niall. I said, I think that maybe Biden is trying to run again because he just really wants to make good on those campaign promises he didn't get around to. He really just wants to cancel my student loan debt. Yeah. That would have been a better message, honestly, Robbie, if they were like, well, we need a majority in the House and the Senate so we can really get some stuff done. Everybody turn out and vote. That's what we've got to do. We're not even getting that from the Democrats. They're just like, please get Trump out. We are just check the box, who is not Donald Trump. And so many people are fine with that. I'm not fine with that. Anyone that has family that struggles paycheck to paycheck is not fine with that. And so Kamala Harris might be the alternative. And it kind of carries on with our Star Wars analogy here, because if Biden doesn't pave the way for a Kamala Harris presidency and promote her to be a master on the Jedi Council as Yoda, she might turn into Darth Harris. And it might be worse than what we faced with John with the Hutt.
I'm loving this.
I think, this is also a point of power. If he lets other people replace him with a coup, how will he look then? What will his legacy be then? There's some kind of position of power in ushering in the next generation of leadership.
Faith in your new apprentice misplaced, I believe, as Yoda says at one point, as is your faith in the dark side. We will be continuing to examine the Biden dilemma from all angles. Stay tuned, more Rising right after this. was billed as a make-it-or-break-it television interview moment for Joe Biden. After his disastrous debate performance, ABC's George Stephanopoulos did fly out to Wisconsin to sit down with the president, who was speaking to supporters in that swing state. Now, Stephanopoulos grilled him on whether his rough debate night was indicative of mental decline or just a one-off. Let's watch.
Was this a bad episode or the sign of a more serious condition?
It was a bad episode. No indication of any serious condition. I was exhausted. I didn't listen to my instincts in terms of preparing, and I had a bad night.
You know, you say you were exhausted, and I know you've said that before as well, but you came, and you did have a tough month, but you came home from Europe about 11 or 12 days before the debate, spent 6 days in Camp David. Why wasn't that enough rest time, enough recovery time?
Because I was sick. I was feeling terrible. Matter of fact, the docs with me, I asked them, they did a COVID test because they were trying to figure out what was wrong. They did a test to see whether or not I had some infection, you know, a virus. I didn't. They just had a really bad cold.
Stephanopoulos pressed deeper into the issue of President Biden's cognitive abilities.
Are you the same man today that you were when you took office 3.5 years ago?
In terms of successes, yes.
Stephanopoulos then asked Biden if he's ever had a cognitive test or if he would ever have one.
Have you had a full neurological and cognitive evaluation?
I get a full neurological test every day with me. And I've had a full physical. I had, you know, I mean, I've been at Walter Reed for my physicals. I mean, yes, the answer is.
I know your doctor said he consulted with a neurologist. I guess I'm asking a slightly different question. Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No, no one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do. You know, not only am I campaigning, but I'm running the world.
Throughout the interview, Biden was defiant.
I convinced myself of two things. I'm the most qualified person to beat him, and I know how to get things done.
If you can be convinced that you cannot defeat Donald Trump, will you stand down?
It depends if the Lord Almighty comes out and tells me that, I might do that.
At this point, every word that Biden utters or mumbles is being parsed. The original ABC transcript had Biden saying, quote, "goodest job." Pressure from the White House spurred ABC News to, quote, "correct the transcript to good as job." Hear the clip for yourself.
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the goodest job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
Right-wing commentator Megyn Kelly went after Stephanopoulos for his political past in an online video posted the same day of the interview with President Biden.
You created a whole command center designed to smear Bill Clinton's sexual assault and rape accusers so you could elevate him right into the presidency. The attorney representing many of Bill's accusers, and there were many, George, Juanita Broderick, Kathleen Willey, Paula Jones, Jennifer Flowers, to name just a few, said you and James Carville, at Hillary Clinton's direction, formed a so-called war room, whose purpose was, quote, to destroy any woman that would challenge Bill Clinton. Did you defend Paula Jones, saying, "We don't shame accusers, that's wrong"? No. You compared Jones to Tanya Harding as, quoting here from the New York Times, just another woman seeking cash for telling a tabloid tale. Fire up that war room, George, and destroy her. Bill Clinton would ultimately pay Paula Jones almost $1 million to settle her civil suit against him. And you remained Team Clinton all the way. To say nothing of Juanita Broderick's rape allegation or Kathleen Willey's allegations and more. But now you, quote, don't understand how Nancy Mace can support a man found liable for sexual assault of one woman 30 years ago in a civil trial in which the burden of proof is just 51% likely. My God, how did anyone at ABC think this was a good line of inquiry for George Stephanopoulos?
Megan really laying into him there.
She might have a career reading dramatic novels for Audibles, the app. I don't know. I think Stephanopoulos did a fair job pressuring Biden and asking some tough questions. I don't know if he deserved that skewering from Megyn Kelly. I think it was giving a little bit off the note or off the beat for Megyn Kelly there.
Well, look, I think it's helpful to remember George Stephanopoulos' background as a Democratic comms person for Clinton. This is something that should always be kept in mind. But you're right that even if Stephanopoulos was trying to make it a soft interview on behalf of Biden, even if his goal, I'm not saying I'm persuaded it was his goal, but let's say his goal was to help Biden there, to give him a soft interview because Stephanopoulos is very against Republicans and wants to get Biden elected again. Even if that was his goal, it was not accomplished, and it was not accomplished because Joe Biden cannot be helped in such environments. Look, that performance was not as bad as the debate performance, but again, it was a much, much softer environment. And, you still had him seeming, to me at least, somewhat confused. He had very short answers. He seemed to be sticking to very short answers because he knows he gets lost in his train of thought if he goes much beyond that. He was muted in his energy level is so far down. He seemed tired to me while he was doing that. It was not. I don't think nobody watching it was blown out of the water, was reassured, was saying, okay, now we know that the debate was a one-off. This is all fine. Look at that performance. It was maybe like if the debate hadn't happened, you would have still looked at that interview and gone, man, does he still have it all together? Is he capable of doing this? It was not as bad as the debate. Still not good would be my verdict.
Yeah, I think we already know how Biden performs when he's getting tough questions. We saw that in the debates. It was bad. I think everyone was wondering, what's he like on a day-to-day basis? What's he like if you just sit down and talk to him straight? People were calling for town halls, Chris Murphy among them, saying Biden needs to go out and give some longer speeches to prove to the country, if he has the wherewithal to do so, he can. And he's not experienced a cognitive decline to the severe degree we all saw on the debate stage. So I think Stephanopoulos, sitting down with him, everyone was curious about how this would go. Sitting down for a long conversation, he doesn't seem to have the wherewithal to be serving in the White House. He doesn't seem like a candidate that can beat Donald Trump in November. And so I think it was the right thing to do as a journalist, to sit down with him, if you have the platform to do this, to get the president, who everyone is wondering about, to just talk for a long period of time in a different setting, to see if what we were getting was really just a bad night, a bad cold, weird stuff going on. But I think it was so awful. I wasn't expecting this to go any better. I wasn't expecting, as they would say, an Adderalled up Biden, someone on performance enhancers for a 60 Minutes interview. That's really not what we got. We got probably the Joe Biden that is in meetings every day. And he's not making complete sentences. He's not saying real words. I don't know if he said goodest or a good as job as he could. But the point is, we can't tell the difference. Can foreign leaders, where they're getting translations from people who are, their personnel who come with them, are they able to communicate effectively with Joe Biden, the supposed leader of the free world? Agree to a cognitive test. That's not a test. Anyone in those meetings can come out of it and say whatever they want to their advantage. And I think that's what people are concerned about. That's why people are calling for the independent tests. And so, yeah, people got what they wanted to see from this. And I don't think they're satisfied he's the best candidate.
Yeah, substantively, two big highlights from the interview that you just highlighted. One of them, him not agreeing to take an independent cognitive test, saying that just doing the job of presidency is that test. Of course, we're not able to evaluate that in the same way we would be able to look at the results of an independent cognitive test. I think it's somewhat telling he's absolutely unwilling to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is the clearest answer he gave, the clearest he was when he said he would not step aside, that it would take an act of God. Only if the Almighty above came down and told Joe Biden that he would not win against Donald Trump would he step aside. That is the only situation in which he would. That is a pretty clear, pretty direct rebuke of everyone in the Democratic Party right now who is coming around to the idea that he should not be the candidate, who's starting to speak up. We're meeting in Washington this week to hash it out to nervous swing state Democrats who are going to be on the ballot with him at the top of the ticket. He's basically saying none of them matter. It's not going to happen. That could change, obviously, but it is a pretty clear indication to me that he's said the same thing now in several different formats, in form of an open letter on Twitter, that he has no intention of stepping aside. We'll see if that continues, but for now it would take an act of God. We'll have more Rising right after this.
An angry Britain voted for change last week and kicked the Conservative Party to the curb after 14 years. UK's Labour Party won big when prosecutor turned politician Keir Starmer trounced the opposition. In nearby France, politics are in gridlock. There is a hung parliament and uncertainty about what is next after a snap election on Sunday. Analysts predicted a far-right sweep, but instead the left-wing New Popular Front won a solid number of seats.
The French President Emmanuel Macron cast the country into turmoil last month by calling for snap elections. His centrist party came in second with 150 seats. These results did surprise some, as political analysts had predicted shifts to the right. So let's get into what's happening here and what comes next. Here with us to explain Europe's political landscape is Niall Stanage, The Hill's White House columnist. Thanks for joining us, Niall.
Pleasure to be here.
So let's actually start with France, because these results are more recent. And my understanding from looking at it is that while the conservative people did not do as well as expected, that was explicitly because of a strategy adopted by Macron's coalition and the left coalition to strategically withdraw alternately from some of the races in order to make it so to consolidate the non-conservative vote, and that's why these results are this way. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's right, except that they wouldn't use the word conservative. They would use the word far right to describe the Marine Le Pen helmed party that was expected to win this second round. There is also a centre-right Conservative Party in France, but we won't get too deep into the weeds there. Basically what happened was, in this second round, there were many, many constituencies in which 3 candidates had qualified for the runoff. And in more than 200 of those instances, either the Macron candidate or the left/Green candidate dropped out to give the other guy a clear shot at defeating the National Rally, which is the Marine Le Pen party, and that appears to have worked as a tactical matter.
Yeah, I saw a lot of conservatives complaining that it's cheating or it's a dirty trick. I'm like, well, that's just politics. That's just how it works.
Tactical voting, right?
So speak to us now of the results in England, where we've been talking a lot on the show about the rightward trajectory of Europe, about frustration with center-left neoliberal governance, frustration with the economic situation, with immigration in particular. But here in England, where the Conservatives have been in charge for forever, you have the kind of revolution, the shift, the changing of the guard actually benefiting the centre-left in England. Talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. A very big win for Keir Starmer's Labour Party here. Starmer, for people who aren't familiar with him, is a sort of quasi-Tony Blair kind of figure. Centre-left, not hard-left by any stretch. Very different from his predecessor, Jeremy Corbyn. Long story short, I think a large part of this was the voters being tired of Conservative rule after 14 years. Again, there's a lot of tactical voting or political maths involved here, because what happened was Labour made huge gains in seats while only increasing its share of the vote by 2%. What actually produced this result was the Nigel Farage, the ultra-Eurosceptical party, ate into the Conservative vote massively. So the Conservatives went down about 20 points. Labour increased by 2, and that was enough to give Labour this big majority.
And I think we need to understand the Labour Party that we have today is not the Labour Party of some time ago. We did see Jeremy Corbyn decide to run as an independent and kept his seat. This was a decision largely made over the Labour Party's lack of recognition of the state of Palestine and calling for a ceasefire. Can you speak to that division on the left in the UK a little bit?
Yeah, I think that was really important, and it's an important point to raise, Jess, because it wasn't only Jeremy Corbyn, although of course he's the most prominent person affiliated with that kind of view. There were a number of other seats where independents ran and defeated Labour candidates primarily over the issue of Gaza, including one shadow cabinet minister in the city of Leicester who lost his seat on that exact issue. So while on one hand Starmer was trying to position the Labour Party in a more centrist role, they clearly lost votes over Gaza and lost some seats over Gaza as well.
You know, I also want to ask about what we can draw in terms of lessons from France. A lot of people have framed this U.S. election as the far right versus potentially centrists and the left in the U.S. as well. And we did see this election and the organizing come together in a very short amount of time when we have Democratic strategists saying we wouldn't have enough time to replace Biden with another candidate. And also we have to frame this as democracy's at stake. You have to vote the far right out, no matter if you like our platform or not. Whereas in France, there was a clear policy platform of this coalition of leftists, and it was organized quite fast. Do you think there's parallels the Democratic Party in the U.S. can learn from?
I certainly think it's interesting how quickly that leftist Green coalition in France came together. And like you say, Jess, it was specific policies as well, lowering the age of retirement, for example, actually making the seeking of amnesty easier, which is sort of runs against the current grain of thinking on migration topics. Now, obviously, there are a lot of differences. We don't want to overdo the parallels. The other thing I would say as a cautionary note is in vote share, the Marine Le Pen party still came top. Now, this is complicated because of the tactical voting, but they still got more votes than anyone else. So it's still, if you're opposed to the far right, a fairly ominous situation in terms of her capacity to sort of mainstream that party.
I think it speaks to an anti-incumbency mood that is taking hold in the world. Voters seem angry with the situation, whether in Europe, whether here, seem frustrated with leadership in England that ended up benefiting the Labour Party. In France, this has benefited the left and the right. But people are frustrated with the direction of their countries, with the leadership, with the policies they've seen. And, if you're applying that lesson to the American political landscape, in addition to all of the problems Biden's having right now, it would seem to be painting a grim picture.
Well, certainly, Macron in France was the big loser of this election. This idea that you could form a coalition and a new party that was neither left nor right, that got very heavily rebuked. He will be term limited out at the next presidential election, so it won't affect him personally. I do agree that there is an anti-incumbency, anti-elite, anti-establishment kind of sentiment, both internationally and here at home. We'll have to see how that plays out, but yes, it doesn't bode particularly well for Biden, I don't think.
And I think it's also important to note that policies that are considered far left in the U.S. are not as far left in France. We have people taking to the streets when they threaten to, increase the retirement age by just a couple of years. But they promised to lower France's monthly minimum wage, lowering the legal retirement age, building 1 million new affordable homes, and freezing the prices of basic necessities, including food, energy, and gas. A lot of these promises were not what we would think of when we think of the far left, in France at least. But in the U.S., these are things you don't even touch. You're a terrible communist if you think food should be affordable in the U.S. And so it's very interesting to think that there are some populist policies that are popular among the working class that I think could really benefit someone like Joe Biden, and that might be one of the only parallels we can take away. But do you think it's too little too late for the Democrats to start promising real things, given they've been in office for 4 years and people are not happy with the economy?
To the final specific point, Jessica, I always think it's difficult for an incumbent party to make the case that it's going to enact sweeping change if it hasn't done so far, because you're always vulnerable to the argument, well, why didn't you do that when you started rather than now? To your broader point, though, I mean, yes, absolutely, there are in Europe generally, particularly Western Europe, the centre of political gravity in terms of the political parties is just vastly different. I mean, I think about it having grown up in the north of Ireland, part of the UK. You know, the argument for universal health care there was won in the 1940s by a socialist Labour MP called Aaron Bevan. We are still arguing about that in this country. It is still seen as something that has a whiff of communism about it, when in fact it's one of the most revered institutions in British life.
I certainly smell communism, but we'll leave that debate for another day. Niall Standage, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Are the walls closing in on Joe Biden? It certainly seems like that. Some House Democrats now publicly calling on him to step down. Senate Democrats say he needs to do more to reassure voters at a minimum. Democratic Senator Chris Murphy was supposed to lead a meeting Monday with other Democrats in the upper chamber to discuss Biden's fate, but per reports, the rendezvous has been pushed to tomorrow. Tomorrow's weekly Senate luncheon, rather. Here he is with CNN's Dana Bash on Sunday's State of the Union.
This week, I think the president needs to engage in the kind of interaction with voters that will prove to those that are skeptical out there that he can do the job. And if he can't do that, then he's got a decision to make about what the path forward is.
Joining us to discuss the reasons behind the delay is Michael Starr Hopkins, a Democratic strategist. Michael, welcome back to Rising.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, so let's get right into it. What are you hearing on the Hill about this disastrous news cycle for Biden? The pressure seems to be mounting. Fill us in.
Yeah, so when I talk to kind of staffers on the Hill, what you're hearing is there's a lot of frustration because the president's signaling to them that in no situation does he see himself getting out. And then when I talk to people on the campaign, you're kind of hearing a muddied effect because he says he's not getting out, but a lot of them can see the writing on the wall. As House members and Senate members come back, they're going to be calling for him to step out of this race, but he's refusing to do so.
He's showing no signs of wanting to get out of this race. Jessica, how's your thinking evolving on this? I still maintain he's not going anywhere.
Well, when you have prominent members of the party that don't want the candidate to be the one running for president, what kind of a party do you have? This is a perfect scenario where there's some kind of coup at the Democratic National Convention this year. Michael, what would you make of something like that happening?
I think it's getting increasingly likely. If President Biden really decides that no matter what, he's not going to step aside, then you're going to have an issue with delegates, because what we're really starting to hear is an increasing effort to move some of those delegates off of the Biden path and to open it up. Now, Democrats' best path forward, I would say, would be having Kamala Harris step forward and then putting somebody like Josh Shapiro as the VP on the ticket. But if we open things up at the convention, then we're really looking to kind of mayhem.
Doesn't Biden have to release his delegates? He won those delegates. I think, what are the circumstances under which they don't actually have to vote for him? I know there are circumstances. It starts to get a little bit technical, but they are, as of now, unless he gives them other instructions, they are extraordinarily likely to choose him as the nominee.
Yeah, the Democrats have gotten rid of what used to be called superdelegates, so they're bound on that first ballot. So likely any kind of movement to remove themselves from having to select him would be led by court challenges. But at the end of the day, what Biden doesn't want is to go into a convention where people are protesting, where his numbers have already cratered, and now it looks increasingly likely that he'll help elect President Trump. And so what we're leading into now is this really kind of decision moment, because Democrats have a little less than 2 weeks to come up with some sort of plan.
Right. And we just saw in the French elections over the weekend that they put an election together very fast. It was a similar kind of framework where they were like, we really have to crush, the far right. And they did it by promising on some policies, not just saying you have to vote for us or else democracy is at stake and the right's going to take over. There was an actual platform. And I think that's what people really want to see. They want to see a Joe Biden that can promise on policies. And that's not the Joe Biden we're getting. And so I think that's the biggest weakness here. And it does take money to win an election, right? And a lot of the major donors are saying that they're going to pull funds. Do you think that, between the Democrats, the prominent Democrats in the House, Senate, governors across the country versus the donors have more sway when it comes to pressuring Biden to step aside?
At the end of the day, the donors are the ones that are going to be the death knell to the campaign, because what you're already starting to hear are people like the Disney heiress saying that they'll only fund down ticket races. Members of Congress obviously are going to be concerned with their election races over Joe Biden's. But once he becomes a drag on the ticket, then that's where you start to see a lot of separation. What I'm really hearing from inside the campaign is he's looking for an off-ramp. You know, there's frustration around him actually saying that he's going to stay in no matter what, but the idea that he would tank Democrats' chances and really put democracy at a threat, I think that's really the legacy that he doesn't want to leave. And so there becomes this question of at what point is he torching his entire legacy, torching Democrats' chances moving forward versus allowing himself to gracefully step aside.
But from his perspective, we know that what he's thinking is, they counted me out before. In 2016, I was shoved aside unceremoniously to make way for Hillary Clinton, which ended up being a terrible choice because she lost an election that maybe Biden would have won. Biden then did win against Trump 4 years later, so that kind of demonstrates that experiment a little bit. And even in 2020, he was not automatically at first the choice of anyone. There was top elite media, certainly in Democratic circles, were absolutely against him. They wanted Warren, they wanted Mayor Pete, they wanted Klobuchar. The New York Times endorsed like every candidate but him. They endorsed 2 candidates. There was no movement toward him until it was clear Bernie Sanders was doing really well, and then there was a crystallizing effect around him at that point. But that was belatedly. His view is that he's always been counted out by the people who run the party, and they've gotten it wrong time after time, and he's gonna prove them wrong one last time. That seems to be his mindset, no?
It is. It's almost Trumpian in the way that he's holding the party hostage. But if you really think about it, no one actually chose Joe Biden. If you look back at history and how things worked out, it's like you said, it was the threat that Bernie Sanders was going to be the nominee that forced Democrats to kind of default into Joe Biden. And then it is now the argument that it is because of the threat that Trump poses that Joe Biden has to be the nominee. No one's proactively saying they want Joe Biden to be that person. It's almost a defensive posture. And to go into an election that's this important with a defensive posture, I think, is dangerous.
And an interesting Reuters Ipsos poll came out last week showing that of prominent Democrats, Michelle Obama was the only one in this poll that would beat Trump in a November matchup. And while Joe Biden seemingly needs people close to him to say, yes, it's time to step aside and retire before things get too bad, he almost needs this promising moment of like, you could be the one to usher in Michelle Obama as president. It needs to be not just, we can't have you, Joe. It needs to be, Joe, you could do this really cool other thing. What do you make of the potential of a Michelle Obama candidacy and that path to replacing Joe Biden?
Well, the only thing I can say with 100% confidence is that Michelle Obama is not going to get involved in politics ever again.
Yeah.
But he does have a really interesting opportunity. You know, he's able to say that he's the only person to beat Donald Trump and stop him from really undermining our democracy even further. And by allowing someone like, say, a Kamala Harris, who initially wasn't able to secure the nomination, but has had 3 years to really prepare herself and can actually, I think, turn out African Americans at a higher rate, turn out women at a higher rate than Joe Biden, and make an argument about age and generational change. He has the opportunity to usher that in and really talk about how he led to the defeat of Trump twice. But that's a decision only he can make. Should he decide not to do that and continue to dig his feet in, I think what you're going to see is a Democratic Party that really takes out the knives and starts to leak information, starts to go after the Biden family, and really turn on him in a way that can really get nasty.
I accept. I think it's plausible that Kamala Harris at the top of the ticket, based on the polling we've seen, would fare a little bit better than Joe Biden. Even she has a rough road ahead of her if she was running against Donald Trump, if she was the nominee. I think she'd do better. I think it's not so clear that Joe Biden's going to say, yeah, I'm going to step aside. I mean, he still has whatever diminishing by the minute chance of being reelected president, and I just don't see people in that position giving up power, especially when he seems to be listening primarily to his family, to Jill Biden, and to Hunter Biden, who might have some other reason for wanting him to stay in the race. Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. Well, the GOP's convention is next week, and voters are wondering if President Trump will announce his running mate before then. Now, the three names that reportedly are at the top of his list right now include North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, and Ohio Senator J.D. Vance. We've also heard that Senator Tim Scott has been in the mix as well. Now, some are arguing that Vance, a leader in MAGA world, is actually best positioned as the youngest at 39 years old.
Both Vance and Rubio faced questions over the weekend about Project 2025, a proposed plan drafted by longtime Trump allies and former officials in the administration. Critics say the 922-page plan, organized by the Heritage Foundation, outlines a dramatic expansion of executive power and sets a foundation for the president to replace government workers with Trump loyalists. Here's Rubio responding to the plan.
Under Joe Biden. Is that what Project 2025 is? Is it ideological lunacy?
No, I think it's the work of a think tank, of a center-right think tank, and that's what think tanks do.
Vance responded similarly. Take a look.
I will say, look, the Heritage Foundation does a lot of good work. It does a lot of things that I disagree with, a lot of things that I agree with.
Over the weekend, Trump tried to distance himself from the project, writing on Truth Social, quote, "I know nothing about Project 2025. I have no idea who's behind it. I disagree with some of the things they're saying, and some of the things they're saying are absolutely ridiculous and abysmal." Meanwhile, the Biden campaign said that Trump is, quote, "trying to hide his connections to his allies' extreme Project 2025 agenda. The only problem, it was written for him by those closest to him. Project 2025 should scare every single American." So for Trump to say that he has no knowledge of it, nothing at all, and then to say, well, there's some things I disagree with in it, clearly he's aware of it, at the very least. I think it's very smart for the campaign to distance themselves from it, but I think it's clear that this is a part of the MAGA ideology. He's made it very clear that he only keeps people around him and only wants people in his administration that agree with him. And so that leads me to believe that while Project 2025 is the work of a think tank, it could very well be a part of how a Trump administration would be in 2025.
Yeah, let's be clear. There will be Heritage staffers in the administration if Donald Trump was reelected. What I think happened here is Heritage might have gotten a little over their skis. I think their leadership said something to the effect in an interview recently, you know, our revolution will be bloodless if the left allows us. That was a little bit too alarming and is not, you know, conservatives, Trump people, they want to win. They don't want to alarm everyone that they're going to have some, total revolution if they take over, then some civil war type thing. Donald Trump actually said during the debate that, he was asked about his kind of retribution comments, and he said, no, my retribution is going to be success, is going to be saving this country. In terms of the project, it has a lot of different ideas in it. Like Rubio and Vance, I agree with some of those ideas and disagree with others. I think, we've had this debate before, Jessica, and I'm sure we will have it many, many, many times in the future, but I do think the government is too deferential to the administrative state, that too many of our policies are not crafted by our lawmakers, but are crafted by a permanent bureaucratic class that is not accountable to the elected officials or to the American people, and are not subject to democratic forces. So I support the idea that if a president is elected with a mandate to have different policies, that they should not be willfully obstructed by the permanent bureaucratic class, as we saw very recently with COVID, with so much very questionable policy, both in terms of the mitigation efforts undertaken by the CDC and by the research policies that may have caused the virus in the first place being outside the window of political consideration. I mean, the top politically appointed selected person, President Obama, was unable to stop them from doing gain-of-function research, even though he explicitly forbade it during his time in office. So that's the aspects of Project 2025 I am pleased with. I am certainly not pleased with just like knee-jerk firing of people for disagreeing with Donald Trump or for expressing their own First Amendment opposition to Donald Trump, and I'm sure there's other policies in there that I differ with the right on immigration and things of that nature. Getting back to the Veep stakes, it does look to me like it's come down to Burgum, Vance, and Rubio at the moment. I'm hearing a lot about Vance, frankly. Vance is the most, I think, ideologically Trump kind of person. He wasn't always. He wrote a very famous memoir about his time growing up in Appalachia, where he was sort of explaining to elite liberals why a Trump-type figure would be attractive to working-class Rust Belt, former mining town type people without necessarily endorsing their views. Now he does endorse. He's totally gone in the completely defend Trump direction, which I'm sure is obviously pleasing to Trump. He's kind of so similar on that regard, and he doesn't represent Ohio is not like, it's not going to make it more likely that Trump wins Ohio to have him on the ticket. So I don't quite know what the ad is. He's almost like so similar. It doesn't bring any new people in, but he's so in sync with and in tune with Trump, he may very well be the choice. I personally probably prefer Burgum the best, but it's not like I'm going to get my way. But my read of the situation is it very well could be Vance.
I would love for it to be Vance. I think having someone that mirrors Trump's ideas and having someone who's young with not a lot of experience governing and getting things done in the country, I like that. I don't like the idea of a Burgum who's been a governor before, who knows how to get stuff done within the American system.
Right, you're saying from the oppositional left perspective is what you're saying.
Yes, yes. Do not surround him with anyone that can give him advice that makes him more capable. I think Vance would be a great pick. Now, I think that a part of it, of why he would pick Vance, is because he doesn't want to be challenged. He doesn't want someone questioning his ideas. And Vance is that person, and he's polling quite well on his own. So pulling more people in, I don't think, is their first consideration. I think their first consideration in the Trump campaign is what will make Trump happy, because I think that's how he runs his campaigns. And a lot of people are afraid of Project 2025. Because of the power grab it seemingly is giving the executive branch and the president. And so Article 1 of the Constitution is very clear that Congress has the final say through enacting legislation over the personnel and the activities of federal agencies. So if there comes a point where the Trump administration, if he's in office in 2025, if the administration says we're directing the Department of Homeland Security to do X, Y, and Z. And if Congress has legislation suggesting the opposite is true, or another directive should be how the Department of Homeland Security is operating, this is going to be a Supreme Court case over who really has authority over federal agencies. And I think what people are worried about is that this Supreme Court might go against what's written in Article 1 of the Constitution. But I think members of Congress should be very prepared for that kind of reality, where Donald Trump is attempting to direct federal agencies to do something that's contrary to what they're currently legislatively directed to do. And they're going to need to pass new laws to reaffirm this. And if Trump decides that this is going to be worth challenging in the courts and taking to the Supreme Court, we're going to see the key tenets of Project 2025 about who has power over the bureaucracy in a democracy, as outlined in the Constitution, where we have checks and balances. And when we elect a president, it doesn't mean that they have absolute authority like a king would. We really wrote the Constitution so that that wouldn't be the case in the United States of America. So I'm curious how this is all going to play out, but I think Congress should be ready for that.
For sure, I agree. And actually, I think the Supreme Court agrees that it should not be the executive branch in sole charge of decision-making and policy-making and telling the agencies what to do. My read of that Supreme Court decision is turning it back, just like you said it should be, the way it was in our Constitution. It's the legislature, it's Congress, that needs to craft more specific laws instructing administrative agencies on how to behave, and that the Supreme Court's view is that there's been too much deference shown to the agencies themselves, and they've been operating independent of congressional clear direction from Congress. That's what our founders intended. Our founders intended the legislative branch to be the most powerful branch. The Congress was supposed to be the branch that declares war. The president just carries out the war. The president carries out the agenda of the Congress. That has changed dramatically over the last 100 years. You know, you can point to figures like Woodrow Wilson and FDR for taking much more power for the executive branch. In more recent times, you can point to people like George W. Bush on the kind of national security front, the massive power grab, again, with a willing Congress. Much of this is because Congress did not fight back. They said, sure, do our job for us. We're just going to go on TV. We're just going to be pundits. And it's, I think it's been a big problem. One final thing I'll say on the Veep speculation. One reason I think Trump might, at the end, not end up picking either Vance or Rubio is that I don't think Trump likes to share the spotlight, nor, frankly, does most other political candidates. Hillary Clinton famously picked the biggest non-entity of all to be her VP pick, Tim Kaine, someone whose name I think we struggle to even remember because she did, she wanted to be the star. Donald Trump was trying to, in picking Mike Pence, was maybe trying to reassure more normal Republicans or the donor class that he would have a more traditional guy on the ticket. Mike Pence, I don't think was ever in danger of overshadowing him. Rubio and Vance are on TV a lot. They are ideological people. They give a lot of speeches. They are well known. They have profiles of their own. And I don't know if Donald Trump, if that's really what he is inclined to pick. So I'm still, at the end of the day, kind of betting it won't be one of those two, but that's just kind of a hunch. I'm not willing to put money on it, unlike my predictions I made over the weekend that Joe Biden will indeed be on the ticket.
But Robby, no Vivek, no Ramaswamy, no chance?
I don't think so. In fact, I think he's explicitly said no to that. You could get Ramaswamy in the cabinet, though. You could definitely have Ramaswamy in the cabinet. Nikki Haley also definitely out because he said no to that. And Kristi Noem is, chances are deader than that dog and goat she sadly interacted with. So, more rising right after this. President Biden is increasingly leaning on his family while navigating calls for him to drop out of the 2024 race. His son, Hunter Biden, was named Biden's de facto gatekeeper by Axios and was seen in a meeting of advisors last week. Hunter, who was just indicted on federal gun charges last month, was with Biden at Camp David the weekend after the debate, returned to the White House with him last Monday. The White House later confirmed Hunter helped his father post-debate, joined him to help prepare for his speech about the Supreme Court immunity decision. Plus, NBC reported that after Hunter Biden popped into, quote, several meetings or calls with the president last week, some senior staff's reaction was along the lines of, quote, what the hell is happening? Meanwhile, First Lady Jill Biden, who's vehemently defended her husband following the debate, is seen as the only person who could convince Biden to drop out of the race. She's set to visit multiple key battleground states today to launch a Biden campaign initiative aimed at connecting with veterans and military families. Her tour today includes Georgia, Florida, and North Carolina. So Joe Biden not going anywhere today. Jill Biden hitting the campaign trail. I think that is telling in and of itself. Jessica, what do you make of this this fact that seems to be increasing in significance that Jill Biden and Hunter Biden, embattled Hunter Biden, convicted of gun charges Hunter Biden, someone with very credible accusations of being involved in influence peddling, of having tried in the past to leverage his father on behalf of foreign financial issues. Not saying that worked or that Joe Biden went along with any of it, but it seemed pretty clear that Hunter's motivations were mixed. He is the one motivating Biden to make this decision. That is inconceivable to me. You'd think that was made up, that was dreamed up by right-wing people who are obsessed with Hunter Biden. No, it is being reported by mainstream outlets over and over again now. It is Hunter Biden in that place to make decisions.
Well, think about it this way, Robby. If Trump wins, it'll be a White House pass from one convict to another. It'll be really beautiful. Yeah, this wouldn't be the first time in U.S. history where a president's family member is allegedly running the White House, right? The Nancy Reagan scandal, when Reagan was on his way out, people said she was running the White House. A lot of first ladies have allegedly run the White House before.
Edith Wilson did actually run the White House. Yeah, you're right. That's true. Woodrow Wilson was actually had a debilitating stroke, and yes, that was our first female president, Edith Wilson.
It's a great American tradition, Robbie, but it is concerning. We had Donald Trump be criticized vehemently by Democrats for having his family members be his senior aides and be in the White House assisting with decision making. Now, we have Joe Biden doing seemingly the same thing. It does appear to be the case that regardless of how much decisions they're making, Jill Biden and Hunter Biden have some sort of say over Joe Biden's decision making as president right now. Democrats are hypocrites. If they're criticizing Donald Trump for having Ivanka, her partner Jared Kushner, and other family members as his closest aides, his children. I don't think Melania was making many decisions, if I'm being quite honest, but his children very clearly were making decisions with him in the White House. If you're upset about that, you have to be just as upset about Joe Biden doing the same thing. And that kind of double standard that we see, you know, the very establishment members of the Republican Party and Democratic Party both having this perspective of making exceptions when it's their guy, but criticizing it when it's someone else. In a democratic country, the people making decisions should be people we vote for. And I think people criticize the fact that so many bureaucrats are appointed positions that never have to stand for election. But when it comes to senior aides, I've always liked when the senior aides are former members of Congress, people who have served before in elected positions, or at a lower tier, appointed ones. People with experience in governance. Joe Biden was a school teacher. Jared Kushner was a businessman and a financier. You have people serving these positions because they can be trusted by the president, but do they really have the decision-making power to be senior aides to the president? You had columnist Miranda Devine write for the New York Post that Hunter Biden is a proxy commander-in-chief right now, and that Hunter has, quote, always regarded himself as smarter than his father's aide. I think that's a ridiculous thing for a family member to believe, if that's true, coming from Miranda Devine.
Yeah, I think it's very telling as well that he is so reliant on Jill Biden and Hunter and so reliant on the family right now. That is an indictment of itself in terms of the alleged cognitive decline and the physical impairments, because let's say he's trying to shed that impression and say, no, I just had a bad debate performance. I'm still perfectly healthy. I'm good to go. I'm independent. I am making decisions on my own. But he's relying on family. You know, that's behavior I expect from someone who is getting elderly, who needs more help getting around, can't quite think for himself in a compelling way anymore. That's what people do. They start relying on family more. So the fact that he's clearly, that the family is the ones who he's relying on in terms of the campaigning. I think it's the campaigning more than it is necessarily the government policy, but it certainly seems, I mean, Joe Biden's doing campaign appearances on his behalf in his stead today and upcoming. That tells me something, that he's relying on family when he should be listening, you're right, to political advisors, to members of Congress, you know, in his own party, just from a political standpoint, not even talking about policy, from a keeping Donald Trump out of the White House perspective that all Democrats have. They don't want Trump to win the election. But Biden's not listening to them. He's listening to his family members. I mean, when people listen to their family members, when they start to forget, you know, who other people are, you know, people you casually see, wait, who is that again? That's something that happens to elderly people. They become more reliant on family because in many cases they have a longer lasting connections with those people, and they're more likely to recognize and identify them, and they understand them better. I mean, that reliance to me is itself kind of a red flag, no?
I think it's a red flag because his family are going to be yes men for him. You're not going to get an honest, critical perspective from the people who love you the most in the world. They're going to deliver it to you gently. They're going to have more faith in you than other people who might have a more sober analysis, maybe based on the polling, based on the data. But it's clear that his senior aides have been yes men as well. So I would hope that his family, out of love for him, after being close to him now, it seems that, you know, Hunter Biden during the time of the trial was kind of at a distance from his father. Seeing him, you know, on camera, spending more time with his family, I think is very telling. And hopefully, at some point, the people that supposedly it needs to come from. We spoke to the former press secretary to Jill Biden, who said it very likely needs to come from someone like Barack Obama or Jill Biden or his closest family members to really get him to consider stepping aside. I mean, hopefully after spending more time with the president, they're going to realize it's the right thing to do as family who love him, not as political strategists that are smarter than his aides, although the bar is not very high for that right now. So maybe I'll give Hunter Biden some credit on that. He doesn't have much to do now that he potentially will not be able to work as a lawyer in D.C., but he's also got his hand full of lawsuits. He's suing Fox News for New York's revenge porn law. He's got a lot going on. He doesn't have time to run the country either.
Yeah, again, my prediction is that Biden will not step aside. I think he's intending to go through with this. In fact, I more than think it. He has said it over and over again that he intends to continue. He has made that clear as day. We've seen so many times now elderly people in government, in control of our country, do not step aside willingly. They, in fact, die in office. I don't see him giving up power. It rarely happens where someone is in a position that they have political power, at least in the American tradition. Like, we have to go back to George Washington, who could have served, a million more terms, who could have been king, monarch, dictator of America, deciding only to serve 2 terms and then retire. This is not behavior you usually see from political figures. He still has a chance to be president. Something miraculous could happen between now and November, and I think he's going to ride that chance because he wants to be president again. And if he drops out, remember, he doesn't have a good chance of beating Trump. If he drops out, his chance of beating Trump is 0. He can't possibly be reelected president if he's not running anymore. He wants himself to be president, not just the Democrats to beat Trump. He wants to be president again because everyone in that situation wants to be president again. Donald Trump wants to be president again. Donald Trump has been, convicted of crimes, is facing multiple criminal investigations. When he was running for president, after Access Hollywood, the entire Republican Party turned against him. Prominent members of his own party, more prominent so far than have ceased endorsing Joe Biden. More prominent members of the Republican Party all came out against Trump at various stages, including after Access Hollywood. People in the party turned on him after January 6th. Conservative media turned on him, has tried to anoint DeSantis over and over again. And Trump said, no, absolutely not. I want to be president again. I will be president again. I am pursuing the presidency again. And he's very likely to win the presidency again. So I think that tells you something. Maybe Democrats you can say they're different. Maybe you say Joe Biden is a different figure than Donald Trump. Okay, fine. He's facing very similar political circumstances. He wants to be president again. He's a normal political actor, and they all want more power.
People have compared this, Robbie, to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. When everyone wanted her to retire, they said she's getting old. She refused. And people said, oh, how could you say this to RBG? And then what happened? We had a conservative takeover, a pretty extreme one, of the Supreme Court. So it was this sort of short-term thinking of like, no, we love her so much. Let her stay in office. She's the greatest. Or let her stay on the bench, rather. It's not an office. But then what did we have? Long-term power loss for Democrats and the liberal and left ideologies in the United States. There are donors that are very powerful in the Republican Party that are looking back on that and see it as a power loss. So what do you do with someone like Joe Biden, who's clinging to seemingly his ego? There has to be a threat of embarrassment. There has to be donors saying, you know what, if you're not going to drop out, we're going to start running ads of you during the Anita Hill hearing. We're going to start bringing up your unsavory political record and really forcing you out. You have to play hardball with someone like this, and you have to hurt their ego, because that's really what it is for Joe Biden. He's always wanted to be president. He's run so many times. He's had his campaign just crumble over his past, faux pas on the floor of Congress, but also very serious things like how he acted during the Anita Hill hearing, how he advocated for buses and segregation. And honestly, if the threat is that donors are thinking about long-term power, they're going to be willing to make Joe Biden embarrassed and the Democratic Party a little embarrassed in the very short term, so that there is someone else in office in November running, or at least running with the Democratic ticket, who has a better chance to win and go into office and keep the White House in 2024 but also years ahead. Someone like Joe Biden running through the election would be awful for Democrats. And there's nothing that their top donors and top, elected officials in Congress, there's nothing they love more than ensuring long-term power and the longevity of Democrats being in power. So I think that pressure is really what's going to get Joe Biden to step down. I think it's going to happen. I think there's way too many powerful people who want to put pressure behind the campaign to get him to step aside.
We shall see. More rising right after this. As President Biden struggles to keep his campaign on track, The View standing beside him and blaming the media for his campaign woes. Let's watch.
I'm worried and I'm pissed. Frankly, I'm livid. Because for the last 8 days, it feels to me, I have seen nothing but breathless reporting. It almost feels like media malpractice of them trying to score the winning goal against Biden. Who can have the gotcha moment? They've been splicing, dicing, cubing everything he says, putting on a microscopic slide, and then looking at it under all sorts of magnifying glasses. Look. Joe Biden is the nominee. He is the human being standing between us and Donald Trump. I think Democrats need to stop making the case against Joe Biden and start making the case against Donald Trump. I think the media needs to give some parity to the coverage that they are doing, because in their zeal to fact check Joe Biden, they too are making mistakes.
Maybe she should be mad at the media for it taking this long to make the problems with Joe Biden's cognitive abilities so obvious. Now, Ana Navarro goes on to say the Biden she saw the day after the debate was different. Take a listen.
But I saw Joe Biden, so I'm not an anonymous source. I'm not somebody pretending to have spoken to him. No, I actually did speak to him, and he was just fine. He had a bad night. And until Joe Biden tells me he is out, I am riding with Biden-Harris.
Whoopi Goldberg also said she would stand by the president no matter what. Let's watch.
I don't care if he's pooped his pants. I don't care if he can't put a sentence together. Show me he can't do the job, and then I'll say, okay, maybe it's time to go. Now, he had a bad night the first time that he went out and debated with Kamala Harris. And everybody wanted him to quit then and say, you can't talk to women like this, or you're doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong. He came back, said, you know what, I got it, and gave 4 years.
She went on to say she'd rather choose Biden than choose a man who is, quote, out to destroy the country. Meanwhile, co-host Sarah Haynes said she'd also be voting for Biden, but said she didn't think Biden would win against Trump. So, lots of mixed views coming from The View, but they all have the same flavor. These ladies are all bleeding heart liberals. And to hear them say that journalists have it out for Biden because they're putting what he says under a microscope, paying close attention to the man in the White House, is not putting a man under a microscope and unfairly criticizing Biden. Saying journalists whose job it is to report on what's happening in the country should instead make the case against Trump instead of making the case against Biden, that's not the role of the press or the role of the media. I don't know why they think that the role of the media is to be advocates for the Democratic Party. That's never been the role of journalism. It's just ridiculous. I think that's why they've earned the title of Blue MAGA.
Yeah, Ana Navarro says there should be parity between how much close scrutiny Biden gets and Trump gets. Yes, there should be parity. For the first time ever, there is parity. What you're seeing right now is parity, because for years, the media has relentlessly covered Donald Trump, often fairly. I've pushed back when I think they're being unfair to Trump, but Trump is someone involved in a lot of potential wrongdoing that is getting justified scrutiny. I think his activities relating to January 6th were awful, and those have gotten deserved scrutiny, as have so many others matters involving Trump. Trump is relentlessly covered by the media, and there ought to be parity. Biden, why it feels out of proportion right now is because they've been going soft on Biden, particularly on the age-related concerns that have been top of voters' mind for forever. That was clearly indicated by polls of a supermajority of people and a majority of Democrats saying they had concerns that he could not serve another term. The media in some cases missed that story. I'm sure there are certain cases of a partisan or a biased media wanting not to cover that story. There are cases of them just taking the, just being too credulous of what Team Biden was telling them. There are cases of also media reporters trying to get at the story, but being prevented by Biden's handlers. I'm not saying it was easy necessarily to report the story, but what you are seeing right now is a media that is giving you accurate, credible information about Biden's mental and physical state. And if that feels unfair, it's not unfair. It's because it was unfair previously. It's because they didn't, for a variety of reasons, invest enough effort to tell that story until it became obvious, it became undeniable to the American people in the wake of the debate performance. That's what's different now. He is getting the scrutiny he always should have been getting. We always should have been wondering, is this person capable of doing the job now, let alone for 4 more years? I can't imagine Joe Biden making it through a second term, and I think a lot of the American people are starting to feel the same way.
And let's not forget, some of the same people who write for the New York Times wrote op-eds in 2016 about how Sanders was too old during the Democratic primary. Back then, those same people are making the case for why Joe Biden should not drop out. That's ridiculous. It's a double standard to think that you have these criticisms for Bernie Sanders in 2016, but Joe Biden's fine to run in 2024. It doesn't make any sense. Almost 10 years have passed. He's going to be so much older than Sanders was in 2016. And I think The View, echoing this sentiment that's coming directly from the White House, is exactly why people don't trust media. I don't know why we have a group of women meeting for morning coffee, gossiping about politics. Why do they have cameras and microphones on them? And why do they think they can criticize journalists? It doesn't make sense to me that this is America as well. The View is demonstrative of American demise. The fact that so many people get their news from a show like that, I just have a lot of disdain for The View. I don't think these ladies sitting around talking should have influence over our politics, and I hope people who watch The View seek out sources that are actually critical of government, not people who just fall in line and say that they'll vote for someone who so clearly doesn't have what it takes to win. And it's honestly crazy that they're giving different perspectives, but the most extreme one is that I'll vote for Joe Biden no matter what. I don't care if he pooped his pants. And then you have on the other end of the spectrum, I will vote for Joe Biden as well, but I think he will lose. What is going on that these are the perspectives being shared on a widely watched show? I don't know, Robbie. Just to me, it gives a very weird vibe that we have a group of women that don't have a background in politics, that have backgrounds in entertainment, and are giving their opinions on politics and are widely trusted by a lot of middle-aged women across the country. I think it's bad. I think it's poisonous. I think we need news sources that are critical of the White House, no matter who's in it.
Yeah, I think your point about Bernie Sanders is very good. I mean, Bernie Sanders is, correct me if I'm wrong, I think he's a year older than Joe Biden, but we played a clip of him earlier today on the show in a different segment where he's talking about Joe Biden's situation. And again, it's not so much the literal age number because people age differently at different rates. Bernie Sanders sounds the same as he's always sounded. There's no... Yeah. There's nothing that suggests any sort of cognitive decline whatsoever. It's so different for when compared to Joe Biden. And people have made comparisons to like Ronald Reagan. I watched last week Ronald Reagan's final press conference where he addressed a range of questions from reporters that weren't necessarily confrontational, but he had to jump very swiftly from a bunch of different topics. He had to recall facts about many different world leaders, about the political situations in different parts of the world. And he did it without any problem. And they were saying, right, that there was some evidence of age-related issues setting in for him. It's night and day compared with what we're seeing from Joe Biden. So none of this bodes well for Democrats. At the end of the day, it doesn't surprise me that the ladies of The View are saying we'll vote for Joe Biden no matter what condition he's in. I get that they support Biden over Trump. I'm not surprised. But really, that's not the question before them or before Democratic decision makers or Democratic aligned media officials. The question is, should they support, not Biden over Trump, obviously they support Biden over Trump, but should they support Biden over someone else versus Trump? That's the conversation being had, although it's whether that conversation is getting through to Joe Biden or is capable of changing his mind in the least bit very much remains to be seen. But we will continue discussing it on Rising all this week. I'm sure there will be a lot more news on this front to report tomorrow. That does it for us, however, for today. Great having you back on, Jess, and you will be here tomorrow as well, I believe.
It is true. It's me and you again, Rob.
That will be great. I look forward to it. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss any content. And for those of you who like to listen while on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thanks for tuning in. See you tomorrow.
Bye, y'all.